There are so many things that I don't know and I don't have answers to, but there are some things that I do know, and that I know that if a jury knew, that they would have come to a different decision. The issue with the ballistics and the gun, they would have found out that the shell casings found there didn't match the weapon that they're saying is the murder weapon. That still hasn't been brought up in any of the court here.
Just 1 hour before Francis Newton was set to die, the governor of Texas did something rare. He stopped the execution. Newton had been convicted of murdering her husband and 2 children, but the case wasn't as clear-cut as prosecutors claimed. Forensic tests were questioned, key witnesses were never called, and some believed another gunman may have been involved. With that level of doubt, the governor had to ask, was Texas about to execute an innocent woman? Even Francis herself pointed to problems in her case that no courtroom ever addressed.
You know, one of my neighbors said they heard gunshots at 7:30. Why weren't they brought to testify in trial? You know, I just saw that in the clemency report. You know, I never knew that. That person should have been brought to trial to testify. That was something the defense was supposed to do and never did.
Hearing Francis speak in her own words raises the question, was she defending a lie or warning the state it was making a deadly mistake? In this video, we'll walk you through what happened the night her family was killed, the doubts that almost saved her life, and why her execution still moved forward, making Frances Elaine Newton the first Black woman executed in modern Texas history. If you're new here, subscribing and liking the video is completely free, but it goes a long way in helping this channel reach more viewers who care about justice and truth. You're watching Verdict Vault. Stay with us for more stories that matter. It began on the night of April 7, 1987, when Houston police received a call about a possible shooting at an apartment off West Mount Houston Road. At 8:27 p.m., Deputy Harold Ricks arrived and saw Frances standing outside with her cousin Sandra Nelms, both waiting under the glare of apartment floodlights. Inside the apartment, Ricks stepped carefully. The air still held a faint trace of gunpowder. On the couch lay 23-year-old Adrienne Newton, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. In the bedroom, their 7-year-old son Alton was shot in the chest. In the crib nearby, 21-month-old Farrah Elaine Newton had been murdered the same way. There were no signs of forced entry, no valuables missing, nothing disturbed except the bodies.
Detectives concluded within minutes, this wasn't a robbery. Someone had walked in, killed the family, and walked out. Neighbors and relatives gathered outside, some crying, others standing in stunned silence, while officers sealed off the apartment. Detectives began separating witnesses. Frances appeared calm, arms crossed, no tears. When Detective Michael Parinello approached, she immediately said, "I didn't do this." She explained she had just arrived with her cousin and found the apartment that way. But detectives needed more than her word. Sandra Nelms, Frances's cousin, gave an interview that changed everything. She explained Frances had shown up at her house earlier that evening without calling ahead, carrying a blue canvas bag. Before they left for the apartment, Frances walked next door to an abandoned house the family sometimes used for storage. Sandra watched her go inside with the bag and come out without it. She never explained what was inside. Now, with 3 people dead, Sandra told investigators she felt she had to mention it. Detectives followed her back to Celebi Street, to the abandoned house. Inside a closet, behind a sagging door frame, they found the blue bag. Inside, a .25 caliber Raven Arms pistol, clean, but not newly fired. Ballistics testing would later match that pistol to the bullets found in all 3 victims. This discovery transformed the case. Detectives learned the Newton marriage had been unraveling. Adrienne was rumored to be using drugs. The couple was living together but separated. Both were involved with other partners. Arguments were frequent. but it was the insurance policies that truly caught prosecutors' attention. Just weeks before the murders, Frances had taken out three $50,000 life insurance policies, one for herself, one for Adrian, one for Farah. Alton already had a policy. Frances was the sole beneficiary of Adrian and Farah's policies. She admitted she forged Adrian's signature, claiming it was for the children's future. Prosecutors, however, argued it was preparation for murder. The sequence of events investigators reconstructed was chillingly tight. Around 6 p.m., Adrian's brother Sterling was at the apartment. Frances asked him to leave so she and Adrian could talk. Shortly after, a call came from Ramona Bell, a woman Adrian had been seeing. Frances answered first. Ramona said she could hear Frances yelling in the background. Adrian told Ramona he was tired but didn't want to fall asleep while Frances was there because he didn't feel safe. Between 7 and 7:15 p.m., Adrian's friend Alance Harrison called to confirm plans. Frances picked up, told him to hold, and never returned. He stayed on the line for 45 minutes before hanging up. During this window, between 7 and 7:30 p.m., Adrian and both children were killed. Shortly after, Frances arrived at her cousin's house carrying the blue bag. She hid it in the abandoned home, then drove with Sandra to the apartment. At 8:27 p.m., Deputy Ricks arrived and discovered the bodies. The following morning, Frances cooperated. She gave detectives the clothes she said she wore that night. Testing revealed gunshot residue on the waistband of her skirt. Investigators also traced the pistol to Michael Moulton, a man Frances had been involved with. Moulton claimed he had loaned the weapon to his cousin Jeffrey F.L. Jeffrey, also Frances's boyfriend, kept it in his dresser. Since Frances often came over to wash his clothes, investigators concluded she had easy access to the weapon.
Meanwhile, forensic contradictions fueled later debate. Close-range gunshots should have produced blood spatter, but none was found on Frances's clothing. Defense argued the gunshot residue could come from contaminated fertilizer. Some claimed more than one gun was recovered, but never properly tested. Critics accused investigators of sloppy chain-of-custody practices. These issues became the heart of the controversy that followed for decades. From day one, Frances denied killing anyone. She said the murders were connected to a drug debt, the result of Adrian owing $1,500 to a man named Charlie, a drug dealer he supposedly worked for.
At that time, I know that my husband owed money to this guy he was selling drugs for. The guy is not a figment of my imagination, you know. That was real, that was going on. You know, and it had my husband so concerned at times. Sometimes we would come home and Alton would come out of his room and say, "Mom, Dad's asleep under the bed," you know, under his bed. We wouldn't see his car anywhere, but he'd be under the bed asleep, you know. So that was something that was going on. And of course, when I find out that my husband and children were murdered, that was my first thought.
She claimed Adrian was terrified, sometimes hiding under his son's bed. But detectives couldn't find any trace of this Charlie. Adrian's own family insisted he had no involvement with drugs. His mother famously told reporters, "There ain't no Charlie. She is Charlie." On October 25, 1988, Frances Newton was convicted of capital murder for killing Adrian, Alton, and Farah. Because more than one victim was killed in the same crime, she was sentenced to death. Prosecutors focused on insurance motive, the hidden gun, GSR on her skirt, her access to the pistol, and her behavior before and after the murders. The defense argued flawed forensics, missing or mishandled evidence, an alternate suspect, ineffective representation, the possibility of a second gun, and the absence of blood on Frances's clothing. Appeal after appeal was rejected. By the early 2000s, Texas crime labs were under national scrutiny for faulty forensics. Advocates demanded the Newton evidence be retested, especially the gun and her skirt. In December 2004, 1 hour before her scheduled execution, Governor Rick Perry granted a 120-day reprieve following a unanimous recommendation from the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. But by then, key evidence had already been compromised. Her skirt had been contaminated, questions remained about whether all guns had been properly cataloged or tested. One juror later admitted they might have voted differently had they seen the full picture. Still, when state labs retested the evidence in March 2005, they reaffirmed the original findings. The pistol was the murder weapon, and the GSR matched. Activists and forensic experts disagreed, calling the testing unreliable and the chain of custody tainted. On September 12, 2005, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles voted unanimously to proceed. On September 13, 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court denied her final appeal. Frances Elaine Newton would be executed the next day, still insisting she was innocent. September 14, 2005. Inside the death house at Huntsville, the tension was heavy. Frances Newton, 40 years old, faced a crowd of witness relatives, media, and protesters outside the walls. When the warden asked if she had any last words, Newton quietly shook her head. "No," she whispered. There was no final meal requested. She offered no statement. Prison staff strapped her to the gurney, leather restraints tight. As lethal drugs began flowing, she turned her head once toward her parents. Her lips trembled, as though she wanted to say something. Then, a cough, a gasp. Her eyes closed. 8 minutes later, death pronounced. When she died, Frances Elaine Newton became the first black woman executed in Texas since the Civil War era, a dark milestone. The crowd outside, dozens of protesters. Inside, tearful family. One sister pressed against a wall, sobbing. Parents holding hands, a mother wiping away tears. Some relatives of the victims later said they had expected a last confession, a final apology, but none came. Even after execution, the questions remain loud and persistent. Supporters of Newton, from civil rights activists to legal scholars, have called her execution a grave miscarriage of justice. They say the case exposed systemic flaws in forensic testing, court-appointed representation, and death penalty procedures in Texas. Prosecutors and supporters of the verdict argue otherwise, that multiple tests tied the murder weapon to the crime, that Newton had easy access to the gun, and that her financial actions before the murders painted a clear motive. The execution of Frances Elaine Newton was more than just another state-sanctioned death. It was historic. Because she was the first black woman Texas ever executed, a fact that sent shockwaves through communities concerned about race, equality, and justice. It forced serious questions about the reliability of forensic evidence, especially from legacy labs with known flaws. It exposed how a single pistol, a bag, a skirt, and life insurance papers could become the only bridge between innocence and execution. For many, Newton still represents a cautionary tale, a woman who denied the crime her entire life, right up to the death chamber, executed under a cloud of doubt. For others, she remains a convicted killer, whose 3 victims never got the justice they deserved. Now it's your turn. Was the state justified in executing Frances Elaine Newton? Or was her execution a tragic miscarriage of justice? A case where doubt should have meant life, not death. If you believe in justice, doubt, or closure, let me know in the comments, because this case, above all, reminds us that once death row is carried out, there are no second chances. Thank you for watching Verdict Vault. Until next time, stay thoughtful, stay compassionate, and keep seeking the truth.